I want to talk about a book series from the, I believe, late 1980s or early 90s by the author Walter Jon Williams. Uh, I, I don't know if this series actually has a formal title. They center around a character named Drake Mistral, but I had it in a collected volume, all three books of the series called 10 Points for Style, which I think is a pretty good title, and I'm going to stick with that because it kind of expresses what I want to say about it. 10 Points for Style is a series set in the reasonably far future, and there's a number of premises about this future that make it pretty fun and fascinating. One is there are aliens out there everywhere, and they contact Earth and bring us into their empire, but it's a reasonably mellow empire, and we are definitely a subordinate member in it. But it's okay. Um, they don't ask us to do anything crazy, and they don't try to destroy humanity's like values or anything. You get the feeling it's mostly centered around trade and mutual convenience, and that the dominant powers in the empire are, just they're like the World Bank or something. They just kind of want everything to work. Now I know that's a kind version of what the World Bank can do, but what I'm saying is that Earth is reasonably happy with the situation. Uh, the other is that it's like a post scarcity future. Um, Energy is abundant, and nobody starves, and no one goes. Uh, uh, there's healthcare, you know, like a lot of the problems that bedevil us are more or less solved. But there are there is still trade, and there is still a need to sort of prop the empire up and keep it going by contributing something. And what Earth turns out to be unusually rich in compared to the rest of the empire is fictions, narrative stories, like uh, characters, stock types, drama. We just turn out to have developed that a lot better than most of the empire, and the rest of the races out there, the rest of the aliens, they love it. They love our stuff. They all have different, favorites, and they just really enjoy Earth's stories. Now that I say this out loud, I think I'm remembering that there was an episode of Star Trek Voyager where they run across a bunch of aliens who are also kind of hooked on stories and need something from them, so they try to make a deal where they'll copy their archives. Basically, they'll copy the ship's library and give it to them if they give them the help they need. I don't remember more than that, but it was a fun take. So this is a future where that's standardized, and Earth is so rich in fictions that sharing them and making new ones has essentially become what the planet's all about. Like our whole economy is devoted to that. And what that means, and I haven't read these books in a long time, so I'm going to try to see if I can get the details right here, is that basically Earth is now one giant factory for one giant movie studio, one giant factory for fame and celebrity culture, and it's run more or less on the top 500 celebrities and their entourages, and the machines that support them are more or less the ruling power of the planet. Now, that's better than it sounds. Since we're in a post scarcity world, it's not like they have a ton of vital decisions to make, or lots of people are going to die. And it's open to change. You're constantly being updated on your ranking, and any member of the top 500 knows that they could plummet and fall out of the top 500 in there. So they have a strong incentive to sort of like keep working, keep developing. It's kind of like the Dow Jones. The companies, they want to stay in the Dow Jones or the S&P 500. It's just now it's people, and people. Here's another bit. Everyone is created. This is remember, this is like the late '80s. These books were written in the early '90s. Everyone creates social media constantly. They don't call it that because it doesn't quite exist yet, but that's what it comes to, is the world of the future where the main problems of life are solved. And so we're free to simply explore our sense of like fame and self-regard, and these have become like um, the major human pursuits. The aliens are advanced, you know, they give us all this technology in exchange for our stories, and so we don't really have science anymore. I think it's vaguely implied in the books. We're in post scarcity, so we don't need, you know, vast endeavors of like sort of, you know, capitalist labor, disaster prevention. Like that's all just like done. And so what's left, right? What would be left in a world? Well, we all kind of behave like foppish aristocrats, all of us to one degree or another. Now there are people who still don't want to be in front of the camera, right? They're not like the stars, and there are people who devote themselves to like supporting the various stars, and you know that's considered fine. But pretty much everyone, you get the feeling, is in some sense in in show business. The whole all of Earth has become one giant show business enterprise, and you're in it on some level. You know, you're either providing technical support to the stars, or you're arranging sets, or you're fulfilling some sort of narrative role. So this is the kind of world we're living in. And you know it's got its ups. Like they're not these deadly struggles, but the that you know plague us. There's like war and famine. Like the four horsemen are gone, right, more or less. And you know I don't think anyone in the whole series of books that I recall dies. For example, that's just off the table. This is more about kind of gamesmanship and subtle play and aristocratic, you know, decadence. But there is still ambition to go to the top, and that centers around our main character, Drake Mindstrahl. So, Drake is a professional burglar, and that's a little different than it is now. The law does exist, and property rights are protected, but there are carved out for people who apply for the license. Because fictions about thieves and outlaws and such and rogues are particularly popular among the aliens of the Empire, who you get the feeling are a very kind of like staid, rule-abiding bunch. So they just love that Earth has all these, you know, myths of like bandits and stuff. So we have carved out an exception in our laws for professional burglars, which basically gives them the ability to plan and execute daring heists. But there are rules, right? They have to be something interesting. They can't just be after like a pile of money. It has to be, they have to keep it in their possession for I think it's like 72 hours without getting caught. And they have to publicize it afterwards. So it's like you can do it as long as you make a heist movie out of it and get away with it. And you know, people try to stop you. Like there is a world of like security guards and professional thieves. When they're caught, they do go to jail. So it's a high risk, but it's also a good way to get into, you know, the rankings, to get into the top 500 for ambitious people, because people love these things when they get away with it, and it's just so much more. It has a certain cachet compared to more traditional routes of show business like singing or dancing or circus arts or whatever. So Drake is an aspiring professional thief. He's gotten away with a couple, and he's in the rankings, and he has his license, but you know he really wants to be number one. And each book is sort of part of that journey of his aspiration. So in the first book, he's like a mid-level, I don't know, probably the equivalent of like seed 150 if this was like tennis rankings. You know what I mean? He exists. He's known, but no one really pays too much attention to him. Only people who really follow the professional thieves would know who he is. And so he's trying to think of, you know, what's that thing that I can do that will like, you know, amp me up and get me attention. Because the more attention you get, the better the people you can hire to help you. You can customize gear, you can get better cameras, you know, this kind of thing. The second one is his ambition, you know, increasingly being achieved. He's very close to being number one, and he just sort of needs something to like put him over the top and dethrone the crowning, the current number one thief. And in the third one, we're into that kind of like, I achieved my ambition and it didn't make me as happy as I thought it would, plus it gave me a whole bunch of new problems to think about. kind of like those westerns about gunslingers who are supposed to be the quickest guns in the West, and all they get from that is a bunch of people challenging them, and then they gotta shoot people if they don't want to. This kind of thing. I'm also reminded, now that I'm saying this, I just saw the 1967 Japanese movie Branded to Kill, and in that everybody's talking about like their ranking and like whether they're the number one killer for the Yakuza or the number three or the number five, and whether they can get their ranking back or move up the list. So it has some of that feel, and that's the general arc. So aspirant in the first book, almost about to achieve his ambition, and then third dealing with the consequences of achieving his ambition. The drama in the books is not deep. It's there, but it's basically what I just described. It keeps the story moving, which is Drake does want to experience the feeling of being the best, and the people around him either have an interest in stopping him because they're like police or whatever, or they work for him, or they're competitors. So he's got this web of people to negotiate, to use or to foil or to make allies with or what have you. But what makes the books an extra step of fun, that makes it may remember them and makes it worth bringing up, is for me Williams really sells the idea of a society where style is everything, where the way in which you order a drink, or the manner in which you bow, or the way in which you might lift a glass, really like has a great weight and importance. If we're in this post-scarcity society and the problems of necessity have been solved, then what remains are more or less the problems of hedonism, of pleasure, of style, and so he makes a point of having Drake be very, very style conscious. He's one of the most overtly style conscious characters in fiction that I can remember, and it's partly because it's his job, but one gets the sense that this is the guiding value of his society, and that he's just breathed in it so long that it's like second nature to him. We do at one point see there are a scene or two where we go to his past and his upbringing, and we find that he was a fairly well educated guy, but he was like the equivalent of like a scholarship kid, that he got access to sort of the upper classes manners and morals, and so but he wasn't born into them, or if he was, he didn't quite have the resources so to support them naturally, and so he substituted a great concern for sort of the outer forms of those societies. So he makes a point of being even more completely composed than the people around him, even more aware of sort of the way in which you stand in a certain setting, or the way in which you comb your hair, all of these things. I think he best recalls the stories that I've read and heard about, what was his name, Beau Brummel. Beau Brummel was a dandy, right around the time the word was invented. He was a man unusually conscious of style and fashion, and he seems to have been a bit of a fashion trailblazer. This was in the late 18th and early 19th century, the Georgian era in Britain, and he was quite close to the Prince of Wales, who became George IV, who was prince for a very long time because George III was a very long-lived king. He was quite close to this man. He moved in those sort of circles, and he seems to have really set a trend for how upper-class men should behave in this new international, glittering, literati, beginnings of the empire, beginnings of industrialism kind of age. So where other men would sort of bedeck themselves, he aimed at a very kind of straightforward simplicity of appearance. He was supposed to have spent an enormous amount of time every day over his personal appearance, like the cologne that he would use, or the way in which his neckcloth hanged, just to sort of give the impression that he was of a is better than you. You know, like I don't think it comes to much more than that. Well, Drake has that style. Drake has that very much that like, oh really, you know, and the way of like lifting an eyebrow and letting you feel like no matter what you did, he would be the judge of that, of whether it was worth doing. So it's very cool. It's very composed. It's very calm. He's always like up for a literary illusion. He always knows a little more about somebody than you do, even though you've known them forever. It's like that that perfect upper class aristocratic knowledge that he aims at. And it's that very particular kind of style which can be very fun for other people to play off because they just love the idea of taking this guy down a peg. Now, the story makes it clear that this is a style and that Drake is not a complete cold fish, that it's more like this is his job and this is what living in a decadent post-scarcity future consists of, at least for him. And it also makes clear that there are other styles out there that people your style has to grow a little bit out of your natural bent, and Drake is a little bit not a cold fish or unempathetic to others, but that he is kind of reserved and that he is sort of inclined to think things through and put them through by himself. That he isn't, you know, he's private. He's a reasonably private person, and so his style grows out of that, and because of that, it's very convincing. But like at one point, one of the people who Drake works for, one of the people who works for Drake, like doing his engineer stuff, his background stuff, is, you know, also an aspirin thief, and he's telling Drake, you know, I just don't have it. I don't have the style you have, and Drake says, you know, I know that. Whatever your name is, I'll call him Ellis. I know that, Ellis, but you have a style of your own that, when you polish it based on who you are, will have a profound appeal to people. Because what people value is style that grows out of the natural self. If it's artificial, they see through it. But if it grows out of who they are, people enjoy seeing someone's personality put on best display, is kind of effectively what he says. And, you know, this brings Ellis some joy and some confidence that he doesn't need to copy Drake, even though by then Drake is like the best, that he just needs to work on himself and his own presentation. So there is some awareness. There's more than one style, is what I'm trying to say, in this universe. Drake's style is a particularly popular one for who he is because it puts him in best light. And I wanted to, you know, I think the books are ahead of the curve in terms of what will we do in a post-scarcity future. You know, we can look at the past and see what have human beings done and been like when they've been lifted out of the need to work for their bread, and when they've generally been lifted out of concern for their safety or the future. Well, we know that they do various things. They do religion, they do art, they do war, they pick quarrels, they do games, they go hunting. But one thing they do is show a tremendous concern for style, for how they are perceived to be in the world. And many, you know, styles can take sorts of all different forms. I'm thinking of, like, we've got guys like Drake and Beau Brummel, of course, but there's also guys like Charlemagne, who after building the Western Christian Empire retired to become a monk, or Columbus, when he was called back by the King of Spain, spent most of the rest of his life wearing a hair shirt to show that he himself was not consumed by the need for worldly goods and wealth that he had been accused of. There are these long stylistic gestures, and here you might also think of Freud's famous saying, I hope this was Freud, it's the kind of thing you're never sure exactly who said it, but that personality is a series of successful gestures. So in a post-scarcity future, one thing that some people are going to do is work on their personality, their series of gestures. And in order to know if those are successful, they are going to broadcast them to others and look for response. And then they are going to adjust until they have crafted the personality, the stylistic gestures that they feel most suited and best at managing that relationship between themselves and the audience of other people, the ones that they care about. Now Drake turns this process of managing his personality because of the venue he's in into a way to also sort of be successful and make money. But I think a lot of people, they won't even need that prompt. We know of old they how they are perceived by others, successful or not, is enough of a motive for them. They don't need it to be linked to commercial success. They need it to be just seen by a few of the right people correctly as how they are. And if we look around at what life is like online, in particular in the media, I think you're going to see elements of this everywhere already. People investing enormous amounts of time and their money, but in managing their personality as it appears to others, to aim at this sense that there is a style and that they have become a successfully visible quantity in the eyes of their chosen audience. So, if you want a series of books that seem to see that particular future coming, I stress these are really fun books. The heist stuff themselves is, at the level of of a good commercial heist movie. You won't see every twist and turn coming, and primarily what comes through is this sense of a future where everyone is able to be narrowly focused in their concerns on this one element of social life. And as always, when you sort of narrow down the focus of a story to just one element, if it's done well, and as I think these are, they're not too long for one reason, and the range of people's reactions to Drake, it's very comical. These are very fun books. So, enjoy. Walter Jon Williams, 10 points for style.